Okay, welcome everyone. You are joining the session on administering ed grants, a risk-based approach to ensuring successful project outcomes. We'll just wait a moment to make sure everybody can get in. Welcome, welcome. Okay. All right, let's get started.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session, Administering Ed Grants, a risk-based approach to ensuring successful project outcomes. I'm David Downey, joined by my colleague, Dr. Sandy Toro. We're from the Grants Management Policy Division. Sandy, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I'm pretty excited. I love when we get a chance to talk to the grantee community, and it's always a great pleasure to share the stage with you.
Likewise.
What are we talking about today?
All right. If we go to the next slide, this is our agenda. So we'll be identifying some key resources for you, sharing some policy updates, talking about administering your grant project. We'll be reviewing how to avoid some audit problems, talking about understanding and implementing internal controls, and then ensuring successful project outcomes.
Well, that looks fantastic. Now, as we begin this conversation, I think it's really important for all of us to understand the relationship that the grantees have with the Department of Education and federal awarding agencies in general. We all together have a forged partnership and collective stewardship. Now, yes, we have shared goals, but different roles in this process. And here's an illustrated list of what some of those responsibilities include. I always say when I speak, whether it's to our own staff at Ed or to you, the grantee community, that our folks really earn their pay rolling up their sleeves, working with you on a day-to-day, regular basis. And that's in really the form of monitoring your grantees. Now, we provided a list of a few specific things, but as we're monitoring your programmatic and financial performance, ensuring compliance, it's your responsibility to carry out the grants themselves. And I must say this right now, and we'll probably repeat ourselves a couple of times. It's not enough to do the job, ladies and gentlemen. You have to document that you've done the job. That way we can properly track and kind of establish where you are in terms of meeting your goals and objectives, that we can account for those hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And another good takeaway for today is anytime you hear the word grant or your grant project, that should be a synonym for taxpayer dollars, your dollars and mine, invested into your organization to meet the needs in your community. Your job is to submit the reports, where we're going to review the reports and help determine annual substantial progress, see if there's any kind of elevated or decreased risks. Things can improve. We want to emphasize that. Providing technical assistance. Another important takeaway here that I'd want to say is sometimes the best level of customer service is for us to say this one word: no, disapproved, can't do it, disallowed. Now, sometimes you'll say, well, customer service, isn't the customer always right? Well, we want to make sure to safeguard these dollars, and better for us to have a conversation in advance to say yay or nay before those funds have been used, so that there's no need to repay those funds, maybe potentially with interest, and that there's no issue of getting you back on track because you've always been headed in the right direction. But we're doing this together, working together to ensure your success. Any opportunity we have to interact with you or your data is an opportunity to monitor your grants. And we do this in our role to help you be as successful as you possibly can. We'll go to the next slide, please. There we go.
Yes. So we wanted to do a quick poll right now, and we have two questions for you. So the first question is, what is your biggest concern? And just picking from the options that you see, is your biggest concern record keeping, data collection, meeting project goals? Is it audit findings or allowable or unallowable costs, indirect costs, internal controls, or is it reporting? Whether that's quarterly or annual or financial reporting. So let us know in the poll.
Okay, to see your poll and to be able to access it, you want to be in the platform. You look down the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see chat, Q&A. Right below the Q&A is the poll button. Go ahead and click on that poll, and I've opened up those 2 questions, and we'd love to hear from you.
I'm excited. I can't wait to see what they say.
Yes.
I will let you know in just a couple of seconds. Okay, great. So far, let's see, who's the winner here? So far, related to what is your biggest concern for administering your ed grants?
Yes.
We have meeting project goals
Oh,
at 32%, and allowable and unallowable costs coming in second.
Okay.
And third, let's see. Third is data collection.
oh, wow. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And
fascinating.
then, yeah, and then for the second question about which of these are also concerns, but not your biggest. Let's see, we have data collection coming in at 40%.
Okay.
And quarterly or annual performance or financial reporting at 18%, tied with allowable and unallowable costs.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
I know from the program officer side, internal controls is a big concern. So
Mhm.
it's really interesting to hear from the other side what those big concerns are.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Love it. Okay. This kind of gives us a sense of where we're going today, and certainly is we'll have the opportunity to engage with questions. So we want to make sure to Alani and the good folks here will make sure that we're in a position where we can address those. If we're ready, let's go to the next information.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about administering our grant and maybe addressing the your concerns, I want to emphasize what I consider a fairly transparent. Yes, I said it. It's transparent. I think, knock on wood, and certainly it's to be a small d democratic process in which we have made our discretionary competitions, allowing the most informative and persuasive applications to come to the forefront and to receive those tax dollars. As we're monitoring your grants and you're carrying out those grants, we do so collectively with these documents: the program statute and the program regs, any program specific regulations. It's part of the law that governs your grant program. That's the highest authority, the precedent here that you're going to follow. Grant programs from the year 2001 going back, they have very detailed regulations. Newer grant programs is close to now a quarter of a century, so it's not necessarily that new, but they've gotten more streamlined as the decades have gone. And as such, outside of a basic eligibility statement, defer its authority down to 34 CFR, the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, affectionately known as EDGAR, not a person, a body of regs, where EDGAR is silent. Title II of the grants and agreements, in particular Part 200, but those pieces. Then we go to the GAN, the Grant Award Notification. Now, this is the document. I don't want to call it a contract. You might want to call it that, but it's not. It's a funding instrument that outlines the relationship between your organization and ED. It's about 30 to 40 pages. I want you to read through the fine print, cover to cover, so you know exactly what we're asking of you throughout the life of the grant. We will update and amend those GANs based on the budget periods or change in personnel or change in the award conditions. And all of these reflect back to the approved application. And folks, Another important takeaway is you use these documents to do the job. You want to stay within the scope of your approved application, which by its nature should be eligible and again within the program statute guidelines. But all of these documents together we're going to be using, and primarily we'll be using the environment of the G5, G6, which has gone from a tool of making awards to our official preferred system of record, and a great way for you obviously to access funds, but also to submit reports.
Great. So just picking up on where David left off, Edgar is the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, Title 34, and there's a link here. You should be able to get a copy of the slides. And so that you're aware, you're really interested in parts 75, 76, 77, 79, 81, 82, 85, 97, 98, and 99. That's where you're going to find the grant and cooperative agreement programs of Title 34 that are specifically of interest to you. Also, you want to look at the suspension and debarment regulations, which are located at 2 CFR Part 180. So this is where you will find the regulations that will provide the information that you most need in terms of your grant requirements.
And as we look at 2 CFR, we'll focus most of our attention in today's program in Part 200, but the grants and agreement title of the U.S. Code, it is a growing kind of one-stop shopping for the grantee community. The latest section that was added was Part 184, the Build America, Buy America Act, or BABA, as an example. Part 25, I would certainly bring your attention to as something that you would, on a fairly regular basis, understand that you have to have a unique identifier, your UEI, as part of the requirements to access and to be able to submit grant applications. But our focus will be in the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Part 200, better known as the Uniform Guidance. Now, it is regulation, so even though we call it guidance, these are not suggestions. You and your grantee, your grant project, I should say, are required to follow the information in Part 200. Let's now look at that table of contents of those that key information.
Yes, so this is a table of contents. So this is where you're going to find all of the acronyms and the definitions that you need. Subpart B has the general provisions. Subpart C is important because it has your pre-award requirements. And then D has your post-award requirements. And post-award can be a little bit tricky because you think, oh, well, that's after your award, but it actually means once you've received the award. So anytime you see post-award, it means once you've gotten that award, everything that happens, once you have that award in your hand. And then subpart E is something that you'll come back to again and again. It's the cost principles. So whenever you're not sure if something is allowable or, it's something that you're allowed to cover as part of your grant, you can use your funds for, always check the cost principles first. And then of course, go to your program officer because sometimes you might not see it in the cost principles. But subpart E is our go-to whenever people come to us with questions. We always check subpart E. Subpart F has your audit requirements, and then you have the appendices 3 to 5 and 7, where you're going to look for indirect costs and also your allocation plans. And then appendix looks like 11, my screen is a little cut off. That's where you have your compliance supplement.
Well, and just for a quick moment, I love what Sandy said there about looking in subpart E. And when you can't find it, you go to your program officer, because that's a real important takeaway for today, is to keep those lines of communication open between you and the program staff person identified in box 3 of the GAN. Now, As Sandy said, she shared with you the table of contents for the 2 CFR 200. There's not going to be a big change in the table of contents, but within the actual 200, we are looking to see some important updates and revisions coming this spring. We don't have an exact date yet. These are going to reflect the President Biden's priorities and any new pieces of legislation, any statutory requirements that have been added. There's an emphasis on plain language. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, reviewed the document to make it a little bit more reader-friendly for the public. We are looking at clarifying some language where everyone does their best with trying to make the regulations clear and obvious. We're not always sure who they're clear and obvious to. So we do have to look and make sure that we get it right. We're making some updates. We're also revising some potentially some key sections within the uniform guidance to reduce burden on the grantee community. Now, we don't want to go into a lot of detail yet because while the proposed changes were published in the Federal Register and the American people all had an opportunity to comment on that in the Federal Register, that daily newspaper, we don't have anything final. So I don't want to talk right now about what's likely to occur or what's not likely to be adopted because it's still a little bit of anybody's guess. When the changes are finalized and the guidance is reissued, the Department of Ed will be updating the GANs as appropriate. We'll also be providing training and briefings to our staff, but also having resources for you, the grantee community, to better understand what's being asked of you as you go forward. We'll have more about that in the coming weeks.
Yes. And something that David has already mentioned, but we want to focus on a little bit more here, is the GAN or the Grant Award Notification. So this is the official document that you get when you receive your award, and it's signed by an ed license holder. This is a select few group of people at the department who have received specific training, and they are the ones who can sign off on your award document. So the GAN states the amount and the conditions of your award when you have a discretionary grant or a cooperative agreement. And you can see Edgar section 75.235 and Edgar section 76.235 for more information about those two types of awards. The GAN can be up to 40 pages long, so it's a lot of information. It has all of your terms and conditions, and you might feel like, okay, I'm just going to put that aside and not really look at it. And that's really tempting, especially when it's a digital or electronic document. Oh, I think we went ahead. Okay. But don't do that. Actually sit down, have some coffee, read through your GAN, because you will see terms and conditions that apply to you and that you need to pay attention to. So make sure you read through the GAN once you get it, and make sure you pay attention to all of the enclosures, all of the extra things that come attached to that first page that says how much money you got. Because you want to see how much money you got, but there are lots of things that come attached to that amount of money.
That's right.
You can access the GAN anytime in G5, but make sure you review it again. And if there's anything in the GAN that doesn't make any sense, contact your program officer to get clarification as soon as possible.
That's right. Now, I think we've got a question in the chat. So we've got a question on the screen, but let's take the question from the chat and let's see what we can do.
Will do. Okay, so the question comes from Scott. Are there reg that address internal controls like audit requirements?
Yes, there are. There's the audits and the internal control section. 2 CFR 203, it's 200.303 is the definition for internal controls. It's got good references there. And subpart F goes into great detail about the requirements on that we have for the single audits. And currently, I don't want to get too far into that because I know we've got a slide on that a little bit later. But 303, internal controls definition, subpart F will give you all that you need to know about the audit requirements. Now we've got a question on the screen. What happens if the uniform guidance identifies a cost as allowable, but the program regulations identify it as unallowable? Which regulation supersedes the other? Now, Alani, I forget, did we put this as a poll or do people just respond to a chat, or how
I
do we do
believe
that?
I believe people are just responding to it in the chat.
All right, good. Let's see. What do you say? You got a question, you've got a cost. The program reg says it's unallowable, but the uniform guidance says it is allowable or may be allowable. Which one takes precedence? What do you think?
Okay, we've got some responses coming in.
What do we got? Just
One response, program regs.
program regs?
Let's see if we get to uniform guidance supersedes program regulations.
Got one of those. All right. So
Program
somebody's
regs.
wrong in that one. There's a one is yes or no. What else we got?
We got another one for program regs.
Okay.
Uniform guidance. We're kind of going back and forth.
Oh man, it's a dead heat. We've got missing Chads and everything with this one. Oh my. All right. We want to be respectful of time. With this, the program specific regulations that govern your statute, if there is a conflict, you're going to defer to the program statute because that's the most specific guidance to your particular programs. So, and all that said, so you've got to follow that. Within the uniform guidance, something may be permissible. We'll talk about the importance of, even if it's generally allowable, is it allowable, allocable, and reasonable? Little preview, teaser for another slide. Can you do that with the grants? But in this case, you go with the program statute about what is allowable or unallowable. You honor that, and the other pieces will come into play. You don't have a lot of conflicts generally, but when you do, you go to the program statute, program specific regulations, and obviously communicate with your program officer and get that answer in writing. Don't just accept this, even if you love what we said, make sure that you get it in writing so you can document your records.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit now about administering your Ed grant and what happens while Ed administers or monitors your grant.
And as we see here, one of the first things that we want to talk to you about is evaluating risk. When we monitor our grantees, we're looking for performance, compliance, and any changes in risk, decreased risk or increased risk. Now, by regulation, we are mandated before we put any new money out on the street or to you as a grantee for our new awards or non-competing continuations or NCCs or supplements, we evaluate your risk profile to see how we can best safeguard the taxpayer dollars. A couple of takeaways with this. One, you notice we've got a citation here, 200-206. As we talk to you about what we do and what you're required to do, there is a law, a regulation, a policy based on a law or regulation that is governing this. We are not making this up as we go. It's not arbitrary. It's not meant to be punitive. We're not throwing a dart and seeing what it lands on. There is a method to this. So always ask for citations from your program staff. Justify your activities with a citation as well. We have to, at least on a generally an annual basis, evaluate risk. But through our monitoring, if we identify any changes in your risk, we should revise our monitoring strategy to accommodate this. The graphic on the slide here is circular, where risk identification, we've identified risk, we're assessing how big a deal it is, if it's likely to occur, and if it does, how big an impact would it have on your grant? What could go wrong? And if it does go wrong, how big a deal is it? I mean, that's in essence what a risk evaluation is. We look to find ways to mitigate, to lessen the effects, reduce the likelihood of something to occur. We monitor that, we share information, keep our good records, and look for improvement. And it goes on. It's a cyclical thing. There will always be an element of risk with your grants. And the only way to eliminate risk is not to make it an award. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we have a 100% chance of not meeting a need in your community. That's not acceptable. So we've got to find the right balance as we go. Let's go to the next slide really quick. Sometimes the concept of the risk evaluation can make a grantee concerned. Certainly, if we'll use my name, David Downey, if Downey Nonprofit is considered has an elevated risk with the grantees, that might make me a little concerned about, my relationship with the government, what's going to happen. I encourage you to read over 200-206 to have a sense as to how we evaluate the grantees' track record and such with this. So just look that over at your leisure and understand that we are assessing risk for a specific purpose we're required to, and it is done to better ensure that the grant dollars are going to be used properly and that the projects are going to be successful. And guess what? As we identify risk and risks evolve and change over time, they can increase as we better understand a situation. But if we're working together, there's a much better chance that we can decrease that risk as well.
And when we think about risk and assessing it, we want to really think about assessing impact. So if we determine that there's sufficient evidence of problems, there are several types of things that can happen. So we might designate the grantee as a high risk grantee, and you can look at 2 CFR 3474 for more information about what that means, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We can also not make any awards to your organization moving forward. And we can impose specific conditions to protect the federal interest. So there are a variety of things that can happen. So one of those conditions could be that you're required to submit more reports. One of those conditions could be that you have to check in with your program officer through phone calls, quarterly phone calls. You might be asked to revise a portion of your design. You might have to submit additional documentation. You might be monitored in an in-person site visit. So there are a variety of conditions that can be put on your award if you're designated high risk.
And when we do impose these conditions, which again, they are not punitive in nature, although they might feel like that. We want to be honest and candid. It might feel like an extra burden, but punitive is far more drastic. These are proportional, responsive strategies to get the grant back on track. 200-208 has a list of optional specific conditions that can be imposed to improve performance or compliance issues. This is a shared burden, though, and see what when I say that, understand that we're in it together. I don't just say that lightly. If we ask you to submit more reports, guess what? We read those reports. This isn't an issue of having a student go to the chalkboard or the whiteboard and write, "I will not throw a paper wad 1,000 times," so that they get carpal tunnel and they won't be able to throw. That's why they did it. You don't want to throw anything after being up there all day. I just realized that. I should have done that more when as a teacher. But no. So if you have to write a report, we read it. If we put some kind of route payment flag where it limits your easy access to the grant funds, so every time then you want to draw down funds, we have to stop, look at what you're proposing to do, and then flip the switch. It's a shared burden. We don't want to put any conditions on the grant that don't make sense to address the identified risks. And once we have seen a period of time that these risks have been addressed, that the problem has been resolved, we're going to be back, we're going to remove those conditions, and things can go back in a more orderly way. But they are done to safeguard the dollars and to help you improve those areas that have been identified as a concern.
And these are some examples of specific conditions. So we mentioned a few, but you might be required to get payments as reimbursements rather than in advance. There might be a withholding of authority to proceed to the next phase of your project until there's evidence that there's been acceptable performance within a certain time period. There might be additional financial or project reporting. We might require the non-federal entity to get technical or management assistance, so additional TA, and we might have to establish additional prior approvals. And in most cases, I would add that it really comes down to additional communication, because on the program staff side, we want to avoid any additional issues or challenges or obstacles that you're facing that would cause for you to be designated high risk again, or to stay on that, in that designation. I think you have to go back one.
And just real quick, with that high risk designation, the department's authority to designate a project or an institution as high risk is in 347410. As just with imposing conditions, grantees, it's not done arbitrarily. It's based on identified risk through our risk evaluations that we're mandated to conduct, grantee history, financial audit issues, and their track record with ed grants, predominantly. In some cases, through information shared through sam.gov, we will see some recent issues or challenges with a grantee organization that might help us make that decision, but it's not something that we do lightly. And I do also want to make a quick distinction, because it's easy to get these confused. You can have an elevated risk and have specific conditions on your grant, but that doesn't mean you're high risk. If you're high risk, yes, you're going to have conditions, but having conditions doesn't mean you're high risk. And there is always a roadmap, a plan to get you off the high risk. Now, systemic changes or challenges might make this a longer road than we would like, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, to be as cheesy and cliche as possible. But it might take some time. We don't put the high risk designation on an organization quickly, but when we do, it is, again, not to be punitive, but it is to safeguard those taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And so we wanted to take a moment and review a little case study with you. And I believe everyone should have access to the case study. It's a separate document.
All right.
Alani, does everyone have that?
Yes, so
can they
you'll
get it?
be able to find that again, along, you're in your platform along the right-hand side in the resources button. So that's right below where you took the poll.
Awesome. So if everyone wants to take just a couple minutes and read through the case study, it's pretty brief. And then we will see if you can answer these questions for us in the chat. Sometimes situations like this come up, and program officers have to think through these kinds of questions.
Actually, I went to go check that link, and it's actually the PowerPoint. So let me see if it's someplace else.
There should be a Word document. There were
Mhm.
3 materials that have been shared, so there should be a Word document there. And as we're waiting to get those materials where you can access them, keep in mind, we are not keeping score. We're talking about some serious stuff here, but we're not looking, Sandy's not keeping a record and saying, oh, I know David's going to get high risk now. We're going to take that grant away from him. We're not doing that. We're all about learning in this opportunity here. So be honest. Obviously, with the chat and the questions, I won't say it's not anonymous, but we're not in the business of looking to do those. We're not trying to check up on anybody with this. Just have a frank, open conversation to help you to carry out your important work.
Yeah, and often our case studies are based on a mix of a bunch of different situations
Right.
that are usually from real life examples, but we
Yeah.
try to mix them up enough so that it's not just one specific instance, but several that we've kind of Frankenstein together.
That's well put, and sometimes with some goofy names.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm looking through all of our pieces and I cannot find that handout.
Okay.
But I'm sorry.
I could pull it up
Okay,
and read
It-
it if it doesn't mess up the screen.
that works. I'll keep just sharing and then maybe you can read it, or do you want to share screen? I can give you the screen and you can share it,
Um,
whatever works. Yes, I apologize for that.
I'm just looking for it now. Okay, I found it.
Got it.
Okay. You want to share your screen or did you just?
Sure.
Okay.
I
let me stop
I can share
sharing.
my screen. So let me go back to you.
Charlotte, did she have
Oh, here it is. Share screen.
on the bottom?
All right.
And let me go back.
And here it
Can you
is.
see it? Oh my gosh. It's
There we go. It's on the
awesome.
platform.
It's a miracle.
There we
All
go.
right. So this is the case study, and I don't think I need to read it. Everyone can see. So I'll just give you a minute to read it. Unless it's too small. Is that font too small for everyone?
I
I
David is
it's
squinting.
okay.
He's
I think it's
squinting.
okay. Well, I was gonna
Right.
say
On the platform?
my eyes might be some of the worst here.
All right. I'll read through it
It's
for
good. It's
David.
good. No,
Um,
it's good. I think you're good.
You
Yeah.
sure?
Yeah.
I am. No.
Okay, we'll give everyone one more minute.
I was in a program yesterday and it was really hard to see some things.
Uh-oh.
So, but no, this is not too bad. Not too bad at all.
All right, so it's very brief. So we have our Dr. Sue. She wants to go to this conference, bring some of her colleagues. And our first question is she allowed to use her FY 2024 grant funds to register for this conference that occurs in FY 2025? Would it be reasonable for her to do this to get the early bird rate? What do you think? And you can tell us in the chat.
Okay, I'll watch the chats for you.
Okay.
So we're getting yeses, yes, reasonable. Yes. If it is carryover, yes.
Carry over. Okay.
Was she approved for 2024 carryover funds? Yes, as long as carryover is permitted. It is reasonable, however, an email would need to be sent to project officer since it will take place in another budget year. And then if it's approved by PO.
That's the beautiful answer that I was looking for. She needs to talk to her program officer and get it cleared first, because reading this, it sounds to me like she probably didn't have it in her application because she was just invited to do it. And so she probably didn't budget for it. It wasn't something that she was intending to do. Also, you know, what are her coworkers going to be doing? You know, does everyone have a purpose, or is it all about networking? You know, she really needs to be able to justify why she's going, why all these other people are going, and if it's allowable. And you know, it's not reasonable just to say it's a good idea and I can get the early bird. You know, you really need to clear it with your program officer first. So thank you to whoever submitted that answer. So what about number 2? What kinds of questions might Sue want to ask her program officer before committing to attending the conference? What do you think?
I'll check the chat.
I mean, someone brought up carryover.
Mhm.
That's important.
And there could be the option of pre-award costs. So if your 24 money is all obligated, but you have a chance to save money for FY 2025, depending on the timing, you can do it without prior approval. And if it's more than 90 days, if it's 90 days, you wouldn't need prior approval. But if it's more than 90 days out, you would get prior approval, where that beautiful answer of communicating with your program officer comes back into play. So you could reimburse yourselves potentially if the trip makes sense.
Yeah. So some of the responses are, if she can spend the funds and if it within the project scope and funding is there and the purpose of the conference with the project scope. And then another response, allowable, allocable, and reasonable, question mark. And then
Yeah.
you should ask about who is allowed to go to the conference.
Yep. Beautiful. Yeah, so having this kind of discussion, covering all your bases with your program officer, great. Those are all the things she needs to clear first. So 3, if she had to sketch out a budget, what kinds of costs should she include?
Hmm.
What would a rough estimate look like? And we don't need exact dollar amounts, but what are the kinds of things that she would have to include for herself and these other people?
Topical headings as
Yeah.
much as anything. Because we don't know where the conference is, so it's going to be hard to get a dollar amount.
Yeah. As we wait for those new responses to come in, I did have a response from the last question, a bonus question. Yes, if there was a health related need, if it was personal preference,
Mhm.
Sue and others can pay the difference out of pocket. And then related to that, the most recent question, we have some responses. Airfare, per diem, lodging,
Yes.
transport from airport to conference, find lowest rate of airlines, hotels, etc. Transportation costs, registration and hotels and meals. Again, registration fee, travel costs, room costs, only during the days of the conference, per diem. And then again, registration, flight, luggage, per diem, mileage, and lodging.
Yeah. So everyone here, they've traveled a lot. They know all the items that would be included, it sounds like. And they got the bonus question, which is that yes, it is possible to fly first class if you get prior approval and if there's a reason why. And the reason why tends to be that there's a medical condition. Sometimes it's possible the reason why could be that it has to do with timing. You know, if that's the only possible time and that's the only flight available, but you would need that prior approval. So thank you so much for participating in this. And I can stop sharing my screen.
Okay, and I'll go back to sharing mine.
That was pretty Buck Rogers, though, of you, Sandy, to be able to get in there real quick and do that.
Technology worked today.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, and I will move us forward in the slides.
All right. And that brings up the importance of record keeping. And he talked about like data collection and things. We want your records, your programmatic and your financial records, to serve as a monetary roadmap through the life of your grant. It should, the starting point on this virtual or real hard copy roadmap should be that first day in the first year of the grant. It should take you clearly up to where we are right now. And we still should be able to see what it looks like to be in the last day of the last year of the grant, where we get our final destination. We kind of cross analogies where our goals are successful. So what are records? What does a monetary roadmap look like? Well, you want clear, concise, and detailed records. They should be in the business of answering questions and not raising questions in the minds of your colleagues. Potentially your successor. Turnover can occur. The awarding agency or any auditors or anyone who might have access to these records. So they want to be consistent with the institutional policies. You should have written established policies that you must adhere to. They meet the federal requirements. They are aligned with the performance measures and any changes, of course, if we've had to get off the plan route and then get back on it, it needs to be revised in scope and meeting those goals and objectives. Let's take this analogy just briefly for one moment to another place. Let's think about if we were all in a big virtual bus together and we were on a head down, we're in, Sandy and I are in the DC area. If we were going to get on the interstate, I-95, and head south from DC to Richmond, how helpful in this road trip we're on would it be if the road sign said your miscellaneous miles from Richmond? Not real helpful. Think about it too, and I'm sure we've all been in these traffic jams, or we gambled a little bit and we probably should have stopped for gas, but we were too tired and the gauge is going down to E. How helpful would it be if your car talks to you, or the road signs, it says you're close to a gas station but not quite there? It doesn't help you. It doesn't give you a sense of how long it's going to take or how much fuel to compare in the time. It creates a level of anxiety. So the larger the dollar amount, the more important an activity is, the greater the level of detail your record should keep. And you need to keep those records for the life of the grant plus 3 years after, or until any legal, if there's any kind of ongoing legal review. Hopefully that's not going to occur. You'd want to keep it until that has been resolved. But under normal circumstances, 3 years plus the life of the grant. But your monetary roadmap, really critical piece to follow.
Yep. All right. So someone in the chat already brought up allowable, allocable, and reasonable. So these are the questions you always have to ask yourself, and this is covered in 2 CFR Part 200, 403 to 405. So allowable, in a nutshell, is asking, is it permitted or not specifically prohibited? And again, sometimes you're not going to find the specific item, in the cost principles. So you're really going to have a discussion with your program officer. There's, new technology being developed all the time. At Ed right now, we have an internal group talking about AI and, all the kinds of, new rules that are going to be put in place. So things like that, have to be discussed, and they're not necessarily going to be spelled out in depth in 2 CFR. Allocable, is it necessary for the project's success? And so we saw in the case study, perhaps Sue didn't actually plan to go to this conference. It wasn't in her application, but if she could make a good case for why she needed to go, and perhaps for some of her other colleagues, then, she could justify attending the conference. And then reasonable, would the cost be incurred by a prudent person, an average person who's thinking logically and reasonably, would they see this as a cost that should be covered by the project?
Now, a few resources to help you check. And as a quick point, you got to understand the value of $1 if you want your grant projects to be successful. You might have an expertise more on the programmatic side, but understanding how much things cost and how long does it take to do something, that factors in on the money. Those are critical. So we do want to make sure that you're aware, certainly of your institutional policies on expenditures, but in terms of salaries, and you think about where the larger dollar amount of items might be, look at your Bureau of Labor Statistics that down to the zip codes can talk to you about average salaries for different job positions. That's critical. The per diem rates, federal government, but also your own institutions. And as you're looking to compare prices for different items, follow your procurement policies, of course, and how you would you'd purchase supplies or equipment if appropriate. But sometimes a quick search engine, Google or Yahoo or Bing or whatever new ones out there, can also give you that very important information to connect the reality of making your project succeed, understanding the value of the dollar as you go forward.
Yep. And some common grantee issues that were even mentioned today that we wanted to, just get you thinking about, carryover of funds. Carryover is okay, but when it's recurring and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, this can become an area of concern. No cost time extensions in the last year of a grant project. A no cost extension in and of itself is not a problem, but if you're trying to do too much at the last minute, if you have way too much money left or way too many activities and no money left, those are things that your program officer is going to be looking at in that last year. And then repurposing funds, you just want to make sure you stay within the scope of the approved projects. Establishing strong internal controls. Something that I've seen in my past experience is when you have a very small staff, and then one person trying to do too many things, and you really need to try to make sure there's a checks and balances, and you have a delegation of duties to make sure that you can maintain those internal controls. Making sure you implement those audit recommendations, especially if you do get a high risk designation. You want to be able to tell your program officer, this is what happened with our audit, but we have implemented the recommendations, and so this year, we're on track to do XYZ. And then, like I mentioned, segregation of duty concerns, which come up quite a lot and contribute to internal controls issues.
Yeah, those pieces go hand in hand. When we look at carryover, there are some in 200-308, again, we're providing citations. What was previously known referred to as the expanded authorities, which kind of governed how ED and many federal agencies handled prior approval issues and carryover. Review that information in 200-308 in detail. Always, here's a quick point. For every dollar you have a plan. And I would contend on behalf of the American people that if you don't have a plan for that dollar, you don't need it. So carryover can be legitimate, as Sandy was saying, but have a plan how you're going to be able to use those funds as you go forward for any uncompleted activities or new activities within scope.
Yep. And we don't want the carryover back because we don't get to give it to someone else. Usually it has to get returned to the Treasury. And so we do keep track of how much money gets returned to the Treasury and who keeps giving it to us to return it to the Treasury. So we want you to spend that money. And in general, carryover has resulted in potential large available balances and potential no-cost time extensions. So trying to stick to your plan that you have in your application. We know that things change, especially, with COVID. We saw lots of challenges, the supply chain issues, those cause lots of challenges. So we recognize that things come up, but always try to provide a justification for that carryover and plan for how you're going to use that money in the following year. You should use the money no later than the time of the funding decision, but in rare cases, new funds may be reduced at the program office's discretion. So again, your program office is going to be looking at how much carryover you have left, and if you've been carrying it year after year after year. So if in your fourth year you have carryover and that money has been increasing steadily alongside your regular budget, they're probably going to reduce your award amount going into your fifth year. Just as an example, not as a guarantee.
And we've talked a little bit about it already, but internal controls outlined in 200-303. It's a process affected by an entity's oversight body, management, and other personnel, meaning everybody, that provides reasonable assurance that the objectives of an entity will be achieved. Key phrase, reasonable assurance. Just as there's always an element of risk, no internal controls is foolproof to ensure that something won't slip through the cracks, that there won't be an issue. But the biggest thing we'd want to highlight here is that as we're looking at the various categories of the objectives, whether it's operations, reporting, compliance, that internal controls are about people committed. They're that commitment to excellence and to doing the job, that segregation of duties, having things signed off to go from one person to another, that you get that extra set of eyes and hands on an issue, so that we've got folks concurring that this is the right course of action. Good internal controls, along with that commitment, they're going to be tested and evaluated to see if they still work. Are they too burdensome? Are they hitting the sweet spot? Is it just right for what's going on? Because honestly, sometimes there can be overkill, and sometimes it's an issue of they don't fully address the issue. Sometimes we've got a great internal control, but we're not following through. Why is that? So you've got to assess, evaluate, and revise as you go forward. An important tool that you might be aware of is GAO, the Government Accountability Office's Green Book.
Yeah, and this is just a little diagram from the Green Book that we wanted to share. And it talks about the internal control components. So it's really nice to think about when you're looking at your organization. If you take a step back, they go into detail about what they mean by these different components of the idea of internal control. So, what's the control environment? What's risk assessment? How do they define control activities? So, we encourage you to you can Google it, the GAO Green Book, and it really goes in depth, and it's a really nice, comprehensive description of the different facets that make up your organization's internal controls. And it's very thorough. So it's really nice. It's not just for federal agencies, although originally it was designed for federal agencies specifically, but we also recommend it to grantees to look at because it's just a good resource.
Now, a little bit, and when we think about internal controls, which is covered in the post award during the life of the grant, that's an important piece here. Single audits in subpart F. These are that's an important piece to be aware of. The GAN attachment 3 outlines the responsibilities that our grantees have. It's an institutional, not project responsibility. At the current time, if an entity expends $750,000 or more annually, it's required to conduct this independent audit. Now, auditors are no longer required to identify question costs that actually it should be less than 25,000, not greater than. But it doesn't mean that they won't be. So you want to be mindful of that. Audits do a great job of telling us what went wrong, while risk evaluations help us prevent those issues, and internal controls help us prevent those issues as you go forward. But it is an institutional requirement, depending on the size of the federal expenses. Check out, review, and look over GAN attachment 3.
Yep, and some common audit findings have to do with allowability, allowable costs, cash management, eligibility, equipment and real property, cost sharing and matching. And something I used to see all the time was that applicants would promise way more cost share or match than they could actually achieve during the life of the award. And then that, comes back to get you later on. Level of effort, and then subrecipient monitoring. And we offer classes specifically focused on subrecipient monitoring because it can be such a challenge.
Now let's do just a quick little game. We'll only do a couple of these, but select the source based on those tools of the trade and what we've been talking about here. Let's see where we can find the answers. Sometimes there's more than one answer to these questions. Requirements for a non-federal audit to take place when $750,000 or more federal funds have been expended. If you've been paying attention for at least 30 seconds, you should get the answer to this one. It's where? Can't see you, can't hear you, but I know you're typing away. You should be looking a couple of places. Uniform guidance, GAN attachment 3, which quotes the uniform guidance. That's a couple of places. And your program officer probably should have told you this and maybe even put it in an email. But those two first are the important ones. Who signs off on procurement activities with federal funds? Who would sign off on procurement activities with federal funds? Who is that list of folks there? Maybe the person in your accounting or business office? We haven't really talked about them, but keep those lines of communication open. Now, I can't see you out there, but here's a tip. If you don't know the person in the accounting or business office that draws down your funds or helps you in terms of following and making things happen financially at your organization, know who that person or individuals are so that you can work with them collectively. We'll skip the last two because we want to make sure we get to some of the other information and questions. But the scope of your grant activities, where are you going to find that? Your application. Some of you played a role in writing your grants. Others of you, you inherited it. And some of you, you might be attending this event right now, and this could be the first official thing you do as a project director. That's happened before. Read your grants. If you didn't play a role in it, or even if you did, get yourself re-familiar with it. Cover to cover, know what you have said you're going to do, because we are going to hold you to it. And that's select the source.
Yep. Yes. And in addition to looking at all of the wonderful resources we've mentioned before, on ed.gov, we have an array of computer-based training courses. These are all 30 to 60 minutes, and they cover very specific topics like internal controls, indirect costs, cash management, subrecipient monitoring, allowable costs, peer reviewers, procurement. David and I even did one a few months ago on how to write a competitive grant proposal that we're very happy with. And most of them are now in Spanish. So we encourage you to check them out. They all have job aids with additional resources that you can access, and they have transcripts. So if you're looking for a specific bit of information, say about indirect costs or internal controls, you can go to the transcript and search for that information that way. But they are really kind of quick, good refreshers on all of these topics.
Yep. Great professional development opportunities. Ed's chief concerns. What raises a red flag and makes us a little nervous as we're working with you when we see that project goals and performance indicators are not met, or if we're doing a little bit things earlier, they're not likely to be met. Excessive or infrequent draws. You want to draw down and pay out as you go. That rate of the draw should be aligned with the scope of the activities. Misalignment of budget and project activities within the approved scope. So we're seeing some unallowable costs or some not easily identified costs. Poor record keeping and fiscal accountability. These are some of the department's chief concerns when we're trying to help a grantee get back on track.
Yep. And on the flip side, the indicators of success are seeing that your annual substantial growth progress is met, that your performance indicators are met, that you have good record keeping and fiscal accountability, and that there is timeliness. So all of these show us that your project is on track.
All right. Now, a few winning reminders here as we'll take be in a chance to take some questions. Read the fine print of the GAN. Correctly cite the regulations. Make sure that we're always following up in writing. It's not enough to do the job. We've got to document that we've done our job. Make sure those activities and expenditures are aligned with scope. Follow strong internal controls that'll help safeguard your organization. Take advantage of those 45, 60-minute trainings. Grab some popcorn, grab some colleagues, take a chance and sit down and watch those CBTs. Friday, I'm working with a program office where all the grantees are coming together after watching 2 of the trainings, and we're going to kind of talk it through. So about 100 folks digest some of that. Take advantage of those trainings. And lastly, when in doubt, call your ed program officer. Their name is listed in box 3 of the GAN. And that's the show. We're ready for take a couple of questions before we have to get out of here.
Yep, I just put in the chat, letting people know they could ask questions, and we have a question from Scott. Is there a link to the trainings that you can post? If you put that in the chat, in our Zoom chat, I can post it to the platform chat.
Let me.
And
I just put it there, and it's I sent it to everybody. It's at ed.gov, and it doesn't have a hot link in it. It's rather long and tedious. But if you go to ed.gov in the search box, you put grant training, you'll get to that page. But we just put it in there in the chat.
I'm gonna put that there. Oh, try to beat me to it. Any other questions? This is your opportunity. This is some great resources. If you have maybe something going on in your organization that you want to ask if it's allowable, maybe find out whether you can find information in the this 2 CFR. I'm getting a bunch of thank yous.
Well, I can let you know we are currently working on one of those computer-based courses on logic models. So that should be up pretty soon, in a couple weeks. We're working on one on closeouts.
Yes.
And there is going to be one soon on our agency level waivers. We have 4 agency level waivers for the Build America, Buy America Act. Each waiver has a different time period associated with it. There is one specifically for tribes. It's called the Tribal Consultation Waiver, but you don't have to engage in consultation to use it. You can use it without that. So that training will cover all of the agency level waivers and hopefully will be up within the next few weeks. But there is one already right now on Build America, Buy America, in case anyone does anything related to construction or broadband infrastructure.
That's great.
Good
What
point.
a great resource. We're getting a lot of thank you. This was really helpful, very informative. This training was enjoyable and beneficial. Thank you.
Good.
Lots of thank yous.
Great, thank you.
That's our pleasure. Keep the lines of communication open. And if you found this helpful, no doubt working with your program officer, it's going to be even more enlightening. But when in doubt, reach out. We'll work together as an agency with you and help ensure that your projects are successful and you're going to stay in compliance with what can be challenging, confusing regs and acronyms and all the governmentese that we work with. But we're all in it together.
Absolutely.
Okay, and let's see any more. Just gonna check one last time. So there doesn't seem to be any questions.
Okay.
Thank you folks so much. Thank you, Sandra and David, for so much for that. Really informative. I learned a bunch.
Okay.
Which is
Well, thank
always
you.
great. Sometimes you think you've heard it before, but you know, just hearing it in a different way really helps clarify it for you.
Can.
Awesome.
Before everybody leaves, again, on your platform at the bottom, there is a survey. We'd love to get your feedback regarding this session. We really want to thank, again, our presenters for sharing their information. Definitely, if you're going to continue to get federal grants through the Department of Education, you want to make sure you are becoming friends with their CFR and the EDGAR. In order to stay in touch, you can again email oie@seiservices.com to your name and your email address, as well as your organization, to receive the quarterly newsletter and the listserv. And then, of course, we have our website where you can always get up-to-date information. And then the OIEX, the Twitter address at OIE Indian Ed. Not only does the OIE share information coming out of Office of Indian Education, but it also provides great information across the landscape of Native education. Again, thank you for joining us. You will have, I think your next session is you get instant networking. So this is an opportunity for you to network with your fellow grantees, and then your next session will start soon after. Have a wonderful rest of your project directors meeting. Again, thank you very much for joining. Aloha.
So long, everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care.